Welcome to the Can Innovate podcast, the first ever podcast designed to showcase Canadian thought leadership. These innovators share industry insights, entrepreneurial best practices, lessons learned, and other tips that we can incorporate right into our lives, our careers, and our businesses. So let's get inspired. We are so honored to have Brent Lessard here with us today, which is another one of our listeners' nominations. So thank you very much, Julie Shum. Brent Lessard is a co-founder and project manager at rLoop, a SpaceX award-winning, globally distributed and crowdsourced organization with over 1,300 members from more than 50 countries. Brent also serves as an advisor to the president of the Durham College for the School of Science and Engineering and was recently awarded the Ontario Premier's Award for his work within the local community as well as rLoop. Welcome!
Oh, thank you, Sapna. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just get down to it. What exactly is rLoop?
rLoop is a crowdsourced and globally distributed kind of moonshot engineering organization. So we try to connect what we call the untapped global pool of talent and resources and drive that knowledge and expertise towards large-scale engineering projects that might not get the attention of traditional organizations.
It's amazing. So what I was reading about rLoop, it's like the world's first crowdsourced engineering team. Is that correct?
Yeah, as far as we are aware, we're the first kind of this nature, yes.
That's amazing. So how exactly did you guys come up with the name rLoop, besides being kind of really cool?
Well, it kind of ties into the history of how we started. And so I can give a little context there. You know, it goes back, I think, to 2013. Elon Musk open sourced a paper, a concept that he had for a ground-based transportation system he called the Hyperloop. And just to give a brief overview of the system, it's a ground-based transportation system where we levitate a vehicle, and so there's no rolling resistance. And then we put the vehicle in a tube or a tunnel, and then we can control the environment inside the tube or tunnel and basically optimize it for our purposes. So in this case, we actually evacuate most of the air to eliminate air friction. Then the vehicle can optimize the energy it's using and travel at immense speeds to connect high-density cities. Basically, we're talking about traveling to about the speed of sound, which is approximately 1,200 kilometers an hour.
This is crazy. So, okay, let me just get this straight. When you say levitate a vehicle, I'm picturing flying cars.
Yeah, I mean, we use magnetic levitation system, so somewhat similar to maglev trains. But basically, we have self-contained hover engines that we place on our vehicle, and they interact with a conductive subsurface. We use aluminum because it's affordable, frankly. And when they interact, they cause the vehicle to levitate off of the surface. And then we can manipulate those engines to actually induce some thrust. We can use it for braking, and we can control the attitude of the vehicle in flight. So that, I mean, Elon's initial concept suggested air bearings, which the way it was described was similar to air hockey tables, where there's, in the case of a hockey table, it emits a certain amount of air on the surface, which actually creates a film of air below the puck, which causes it to levitate above, just slightly above the surface. And so in his system, the idea was that as the vehicle was traveling in the tube, it could take in some of the air that was, even though we're in a partial vacuum, there is still air, some air in the system. It could take that in and basically shoot it out the bottom and cause the vehicle to levitate. That was in the initial white paper or alpha paper, but our analysis suggested that the height that system would provide would be, you know, it's around the width of a hair follicle, and if we're traveling at 1,200 kilometers an hour, you don't want to hit a speed bump, essentially. So we wanted substantially more lift And when we looked at these maglev systems, we could get an inch or two of height, which it reduces a lot of the complexity on the infrastructure side. So the tube or tunnel can be a lot simpler and therefore less expensive. But sorry, to circle back to the name, when Elon released that concept in 2013, there was not a lot of development that had happened. So in 2015, he announced with SpaceX that they were going to host a competition open to independent teams and student teams where they would build and provide the facilities to test these vehicles. And they would allow a certain number of teams to manufacture prototype vehicles to come down for testing. And I am an avid Redditor, if you're familiar with Reddit. Mm-hmm. And there are some great communities there in the engineering space. In particular, there is a SpaceX subreddit, they're called. And the day that competition was announced from Elon and SpaceX, somebody made a post there saying, hey, I went through all the rules for the competition. There's nothing that would suggest we as a community can't come together, form a team, and see if we can, provide some value to this concept kind of thing. And it basically started with an Excel spreadsheet for people to sign up and say, I'm willing to volunteer this amount of time to the project. This is my background or my expertise. And we started to see a few dozen people sign up. So we actually named ourselves initially rLoop based on our origins there and the project being the Hyperloop. But as we were trying to get the kind of blessing from Reddit to use that in our name, we weren't getting a response. And so in order to kind of avoid any potential issues, we renamed it to rLoop, which is a nod. The subreddits have a prefix /r. So it's a nod to that and the Reddit origins. It also sounds like our loop. We were a crowdsourced and distributed team. And it's also, we call it Hyperloop without the hype.
That's awesome. I love that. Hyperloop without the hype.
Yeah. So that's when rLoop was formed back in 2015, almost 3 years ago now.
Wow, that's amazing. So basically rLoop was formed as a community in order to actually participate in the SpaceX competition that Elon Musk was championing.
Correct.
Amazing. And then I think you guys actually won the award, did you not?
Yeah, well, they had kind of rigorous process in order to, the facilities that they built, which was a 1 mile tube, which turned out to be the second largest vacuum chamber in the world. They're quite expensive facilities, and so they weren't just going to let anybody, make use of them. So they had a rigorous process to select the top teams that were given the green light to manufacture their prototype and bring it to the track. So actually, there were initially over 1,800 submissions. They whittled that down to about 140 teams who were then invited to come to present their design and defend it to a board of engineers from SpaceX and Tesla. And that was in January of 2016. So it was about 9 months after the concept for rLoop was floated on Reddit. And 9 of us went to that presentation, and it was the first time that any of us had met in person. All of our work had been done virtually and online up to that point. And so we won an award there, which was the best non-student design. And that gave us the permission to proceed to the final step of the competition, along with 27 other teams, to build our prototype. Then we had a sort of a challenge there because, it's with a lot of these tools that are available now online, we could facilitate a lot of the design, specification, and simulation side. But manufacturing and testing a physical prototype was something entirely new for us. And that was a huge accomplishment, I think, for our team, was to be able to mobilize a community local to the SpaceX facilities. We wanted to build the vehicle as close to where it would ultimately be tested as possible. And so we kind of used the same processes we did to build out our online community to build a local manufacturing community. And then we developed certain processes and adopted certain tools to connect them, the in-person makers, to our distributed virtual team in order to kind of realize these designs that we had made. And we had until August of 2017 to do it. So we only had 8 months. And that was just an incredible process for our guys.
It sounds amazing beyond belief. So is that now where rLoop is doing, is just focusing on this prototype now? Or is it about working on multiple different types of projects?
Yeah, well, that's what's interesting. As we kind of went along, we'd obviously started focused on this sole project. And we're able to build this prototype, and we brought it to the competition, and we won one of the 5 awards they gave away ultimately. And we won the Pod Innovation Award, in which when they presented it to us, they acknowledged the complexity of the system that we had actually designed and built, but also the kind of unorthodox way in which our team came together and made this a reality. And, as we were going through the project, we started to realize that a lot of the value was in the community and the processes that we had developed to facilitate this work. And so we started to wonder if it was repeatable. Could we take on other projects, approach it in much the same manner, and be able to enjoy the same kind of successes that we did in the Hyperloop space? And so we started to look at similar concepts in terms of scope and complexity, and we started to test with a few other small projects, and what we found was that largely the processes in the community was able to replicate the same kind of successes with other projects. So now what we're kind of focusing on is developing innovative technology, giving people a kind of sandbox to come and play in and realize some very cool technology that otherwise goes ignored or impeded by traditional organizations.
That's amazing. Well, what I'm hearing is that, being these processes were repeatable, these have now become the best in class best practices out there globally, because you've got 1,300 members in 50 countries doing all these different things. And, with geography and, time differences and everything else, you've really made it into a real agile, movement itself. So I could see this being very, very innovative.
Yeah, it's quite, there's certainly challenges in terms of different time zones and capturing. Obviously, there's a lot of kind of information that comes in from all of these individuals who are contributing. And so, even kind of being able to capture and store a lot of this information in an accessible and intelligent way was a challenge. But we kind of the whole organization and the processes that we developed organically over time specifically to facilitate the work that we were doing. And so we think we have, we obviously every day is kind of new to us, and we're constantly looking to adopt the best technology that lets our group do the work that they want to do. But yeah, it's been quite an experience for all of us, I'd say.
I can imagine. So do you currently have other projects as well that you're working on?
Yeah, we do. There's a few technology projects that we're developing. I'd say they're in different states of maturity currently, but we're also looking at kind of formalizing and encoding the processes that we developed into an innovation platform, we call it. And it's quite interesting. I mean, there are so many people from all over the world who are participating, but what we found is that the motivations for a lot of them are quite similar. When I was going through my engineering program here, I had these kind of grand visions of coming out and applying it on my knowledge on big impactful projects, wanted to really genuinely try and, have a positive impact either locally or globally. And you get out and you're kind of faced with the reality that, you need to pay for your living, for your life. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these opportunities tend to be geographically localized. Here in Canada, like Waterloo is a hotbed. In the US, it's Silicon Valley. but not everybody has the chance to kind of relocate and participate in these projects. I always joked that, I came out wanting to work on these massive projects and have an impact, and then you find yourself designing lawnmower blades to pay your bills, kind of thing.
We've all been there, don't worry.
Right. And also, I think, there's a large aerospace lean to our community just based on sort of where we came from. And I think a lot of us grew up on, a healthy science fiction diet, like Back to the Future and the Jetsons, and myself a big Star Trek fan. And I honestly thought, as growing up as a kid, that this was the kind of world that, I'd be able to live in, or that I would be able to play an active role in helping to develop. And as Peter Thiel famously said, we dreamed of flying cars and they gave us 140 characters.
Wise words.
Right. And what we found is that a lot of people are in the same kind of position around the world. They go through their respective programs, whatever their discipline may be, and they come out and get a job that is perhaps not aligned with their personal passions or interests. And so what we're really trying to do is be able to give an outlet to those individuals to work on and in any capacity that they choose, and drive those efforts into, technology that can have a real impact.
No, that's amazing. I love your quote, by the way, of you all have healthy science fiction diets. I almost want to make a mug or a t-shirt out of that. But that's kind of cool, because now what I'm hearing is that you got a bunch of different engineers at different levels of skill sets, different levels of passion, different countries. So you talk about diversification, that's just amazing right there. And they're more interested about doing project-based work so they can get the hands-on and do other things as opposed to just the typical maybe 9 to 5. So they get the creative juices flowing.
Yeah. I mean, there's, great peripheral benefits as well. I mean, there's, it's a massive community, and there's a lot of networking going on. So people who are in school or just recently out of school are connecting with people who have been in an industry that's of interest to them who have been in industry for decades. And even we have, retirees who are collaborating online. So there's this networking effect that happens. And there's also a massive transmission of knowledge between everybody. I myself personally have benefited greatly from just being exposed to this diverse community. I'd say my, personal education has grown exponentially since we started rLoop.
I can imagine. So if I actually have a startup company and I'm looking, because there's a shortage of engineers everywhere these days. Everyone wants some sort of engineer for their projects or companies and so on. Can they actually come and engage you to say, hey, we've got this technology that we're building and we're looking for, some experienced people to help us build this?
Well, we're looking at that. Currently, we're kind of more focused on community-driven projects because of the kind of, everybody is more or less volunteering their time on the platform.
Right.
So it's a somewhat unique situation that way. So our focus currently is on community-driven projects, and there has to be kind of sufficient support within the community to warrant adopting a project and pursuing its development.
Amazing. So you got your own kind of consensus-based model that you've got going on there.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, we are looking at methods that we can bring in kind of independent parties into the process. And we are actually running kind of a pilot project in that context as well. But, like I said, a lot of people, they're passionate about these kind of innovative and moonshot projects. And so there's, to some respect, there's a kind of necessity for the project to be somewhat kind of outlandish, low technology readiness level, 5 to 10 years out kind of thing that we hope we can put on an accelerated timescale with our community and organization.
Love it. I love it. The Moonshot projects, I mean, it's all about innovation. And so you guys are basically looking for all the misfits that, to test out whether or not an idea of, having a Jetson lifestyle is really possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're exploring, I mentioned that everybody is kind of volunteering their time, but as we went through the project with the Hyperloop, we're generating a fair amount of IP and tech, and the question that arose eventually was, well, if this technology is to be used or exploited in some sense in the future, how are we going to handle the kind of IP rights and rewards that are coming in? And so what we've been looking at is, our basic philosophy is to have the creators themselves benefit directly from any exploitation of the technology. So you're volunteering your time to develop the project, but in essence, you're earning a stake in the project itself based on your collaboration.
Nice. I love that rewards mechanism. So being that you do have a lot of intellectual property, you probably also need heightened encryption or security. So I guess you're leveraging some sort of blockchain technology behind it all?
Well, what we're actually looking at blockchain or distributed ledger technology for is to actually measure the inputs from collaborators. Ideally, the end state would be able to measure the input along the entire creation chain, measure the economic output at the other end, and then have the rewards flow back directly to those collaborators based on their input. So it's somewhat a unique, I think, approach to blockchain technology. In terms of security and encryption, it definitely is an area that we have to be somewhat careful about, but internally, we try to maintain an open and transparent policy as much as we possibly can. We get a lot of support from the open source community and makerspace community, and so, it's not just we don't want to create another kind of information silo. We want genuinely to develop technology and have it, accessible as widely as we possibly can.
This is amazing. So this is kind of a crazy adventure you've been on. So it's got its own legs. It's growing in so many different ways. Is there a big aha moment or a lesson learned that you're kind of like, I wish someone had told me about that?
Well, it's probably somewhat specific to the work that we were doing, but when we started, it was focused on a single project. But as we kind of grew this community, there was a great need for, I think, two things. One is the systems engineering side, which was not on my radar when we started. But when we were working on complex systems, we need a sort of engineering management system to guide the entire process, but also to kind of organize everything into a body of knowledge that's readily accessible. And then on the other side was the human resources aspect. We're constantly onboarding new members, getting them up to speed, but enabling them to contribute and collaborate in the best capacity that they can or that they want. And so, the initial focus from my seat was on developing this tech and understanding it in and out, but quickly had to shift to a engineering management side as well as community management side. And so that was kind of a big learning point for me. And I wish that I was aware of early, because if you have those principles, at least in theory, set out from the outset, it becomes a lot easier than developing them at a later mature state. That I realize that's probably somewhat unique to our work and the types of projects that we adopt, but that was, I think, what stands out to me as a big moment, an aha moment.
Well, we all need those ahas. It's amazing that they come from us at different angles that we don't pay attention to. And then we end up having more respect for the other players that do all those things naturally.
Absolutely.
Because we just never, we didn't have to live that before. So it's a lot more different. So in this whole entire journey that you've been kind of embarking on, was there any kind of tools or resources that you're able to leverage from either the governments or innovation hubs or so on, or something that you kind of really wish? I mean, I guess this is kind of the outcome of not having something, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, again, we're somewhat unique. We're making this kind of borderless organization that's based on the crowd, but there were a few tools, not necessarily from government, but there were some kind of mentorship groups that helped me out along the way. In particular, there was one, I think it was called Hacker Unit. And what they did was try to group startups that were in a similar industry and then connect them with people who had been successful or had experience with that specific industry. And a lot of it took the form of online web sessions followed by Q&A, but also the possibility to have direct interaction with these individuals. And that sort of guidance when you're first starting out and first finding your legs goes a long way to accelerating your kind of understanding and definitely identifying kind of aspects that you weren't necessarily on your radar to begin with. So I think, same in the kind of startup space, at least early on, there was a lot of kind of intergenerational transmission of knowledge. And I think some mechanism to kind of reinforce that would go a long way to help developing, new entrepreneurs and new startups.
That's amazing. No, that's fantastic. Is there any other advice you kind of give to any aspiring or budding innovators out there?
What I usually say is find your passion and then devote yourself to it entirely. If it's something that you're not 100% passionate about, it's likely that you won't have the kind of, really it's a stamina and endurance game in a large way. You have to be able to stay devoted and focused on your goals. And if it's not something that you're, 100% passionate about, you're likely not going to have those legs to make it to the end of the race.
Very, very true.
Yeah. So that's usually, that's my advice is find your passion and then devote yourself to it entirely.
Amazing. It's amazing. So do you have some sort of key quote, philosophy or business quote? I know you mentioned Peter Thiel earlier on. Is there another one? Anything else that kind of keeps you stay focused and that eureka?
One that I particularly like, I think it was Peter Diamandis. Yeah, I think it was Peter Diamandis who said, the day before something is a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. And I just loved that. I'm sure it's a shared experience amongst entrepreneurs and startups where you're told constantly, this is a crazy idea. It's not going to happen, or it's going to be incredibly difficult. Well, the day before it's a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea.
Love that. Love that. Is there a popular productivity tool that you use?
Oh my. We have many that we've used over the past 3 years.
Come on, teach us. Give us a couple. Don't tease us. You're managing 1,300 people, all these different projects in 50 different countries. I don't know how you manage it all.
Well, we try to adopt open source tools as much as possible, but there are some great ones that you can use in, interesting ways as well. I personally use a lot of Google's products. I live and die by my Google Calendar. We use Google Docs and Google Sheets for collaboration. And there's some great tools from Atlassian that we use. One is called Jira. We use that for kind of task management. And the other is Confluence, which we use for knowledge capture. And those go a long, long way. I'm logged in, 24/7 into those tools.
Amazing. That's fantastic. So not that you get much downtime, is there a book that you've read that has really resonated with you or something that you recommend that kind of, you're like, wow.
That's an interesting topic, actually. We started an rLoop book club, specifically because we found a lot of our reading intake had dropped since we started rLoop, because like you mentioned, we're working in various time zones, so the hours are quite odd sometimes. And we're trying to rapidly develop these very complex and low technology readiness level systems. So it requires a lot of attention and time. So we started this book club where the idea was read a book a month and then write a review at the end of the month for everybody to read. And then in the same way, we're kind of curating a list of interesting books on various topics. I missed my mark for this month. But let's see. Currently, I'm reading The Wide Lens. The name of the author escapes me currently, but it was recommended. Some of my favorites are, again, from Peter Diamandis. Abundance and Bold were very influential for me. And I read them right around the time that we started rLoop. So they were quite impactful on my thinking and my approach.
Amazing, amazing. So do you have a kind of personal habit that helps you stay a little bit productive?
I work as well. I mean, we all work remotely. So, staying productive and focused when you're kind of in a home office setting can be difficult. I as well have 2 young children. One is only 8 months old. And so they can distract from work here. So, I mean, in my case, trying to stay productive is finding a quiet place without distractions. And often I find when I'm at home, even in my office, my little office I made in the basement, to kind of hide myself away from everything, I can get distracted by my own personal hobbies as well. So what I actually like to do is go out and visit different coffee shops and cafes in the area that offer, free Wi-Fi, and just kind of find a quiet corner and keep the caffeine intake flowing. And that helps me stay focused on the tasks at hand.
Love that. Well, I'm a big caffeine fan myself, so I love that. And finally, is there a favorite Canadian hotspot hideaway restaurant that you recommend? We've got a lot of amazing international listeners out there, so I always love to find a way to kind of toot something Canadian around there.
Let's see. I grew up in Toronto, and my wife and I lived there for a number of years before moving out of Toronto. But we used to frequent a cafe there called Hair of the Dog. It's right by where the old Maple Leaf Gardens is or was. Yeah. It's just a great quiet place for some really, really good food, some great coffee, and a cool atmosphere. And of course, I'm also French Canadian, so prerequisite is good poutine place as well.
That's so true. I've had some friends that came out here from England, and they thought that was the most grossest thing in the world. By end of their trip, they were basically eating it every day. It's amazing.
Sapna, do you have a poutine spot or a particular place that you would recommend?
Oh my gosh, I have so many places I'm becoming a junkie for. There's a brunch place called Insomnia in the City that I absolutely love.
Okay.
It's just got a really nice... Yeah, that's in Toronto. And there's a place called Wish as well. I'm a big brunch person. I love brunch. And they actually have this carrot cake pancakes. So I had to go. And the funnier part was at this place called Wish is that they actually said you can only have one order per table. So because of that scarcity, what do you think I ordered? Every time I'm like, no, I gotta get it. I gotta get that. Be the one person at the table that gets these carrot cake pancakes.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm an eat to live more than a live to eat guy. And, I always say to my wife, if I didn't have to eat, I wouldn't. But the place has to have good coffee for me.
Yeah, love that. And finally, Brent, how can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, well, we're on all the standard social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. My personal Twitter is at Mr. Brent Lessard, Mr. Brent Lessard. Our website, of course, rloop.org. You can find out about some of the projects that we've worked on. And we've got a lot of cool videos on YouTube showcasing some of the work that we've done, as well as, you can get a feel for the community who helped realize these crazy projects.
It's amazing. And for our listeners out there, don't worry, I'm going to put them all in the show notes so you don't have to look too far. Brent, this has been an absolute pleasure, and I just think it's what an exciting journey rLoop has just started, and it's going to get bigger and better. I can just see that it's got legs in multiple areas.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for having me and for your very thoughtful questions.
Great. Thanks again for joining us this week. It's been a blast as usual. Next week, we've got a really interesting guest. Here's a quick sneak peek.
For us, we really believe that having an understanding of how technology works and how it's built is going to be really critical for everyone. You can't go anywhere these days without technology touching some part of that experience.
Thanks everyone for joining in and tuning in this week. Next week, we've got another really cool episode. I hope you enjoyed the sneak peek. I'm going to try to do this and see how this works. If you guys are interested, like the little sneak teasers, let me know. I'd love to hear back from all of you. And don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review. And let me know if you know of another Canadian innovator that's doing something really cool around the world. Let's get them showcased. Or if there's an innovation trend that you would like to specifically focus on. Anyways, looking forward to hearing from all of you and talk to you next week. Cheers.